In a world where success is often mistaken for superiority, true character is revealed in the way people treat others. This was never more evident than in the case of a humble black delivery man who entered the towering office of a prestigious corporation, only to be met with cruel laughter and condescending remarks from the very CEOs who ran the company. Unbeknownst to them, their fate was already sealed. The tables were about to turn, proving that arrogance and prejudice always come at a cost. The black delivery man stepped into the gleaming office, the weight of the package in his hands far lighter than the weight of the stares that followed him. He had been here before, had felt the same condescending eyes sweep over him like he was invisible, until they decided he was worth mocking. The CEOs lounged in their luxurious chairs, dressed in tailored suits that cost more than a year's worth of his wages. At first, they barely acknowledged him, too wrapped up in their laughter. But then one of them, a tall man with slicked back hair, smirked and leaned forward. "Well, look who it is," he said, nudging the man beside him. "Here to invest in our company, are you?" The others chuckled. Another one shook his head in mock sympathy. "Careful, don't drop that package. Might be worth more than your paycheck this month." A third CEO, lounging with his feet up on the polished table, waved a dismissive hand. "Man, I respect the hustle. You gotta start somewhere, right? Maybe in a few decades you'll make it past the lobby." More laughter. Loud, unbothered. They weren't whispering. They wanted him to hear. The delivery man remained silent, placing the package on the table with practiced ease. He didn't react, didn't flinch. He had seen men like these before, ones who believed wealth meant superiority, who thought power was permanent. Then the glass doors swung open. The sound of heels clicking against marble cut through the laughter like a knife. The woman who entered didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her presence alone commanded silence. "Gentlemen," she said coolly, stepping forward. A folder was placed on the table. "Your services are no longer required." Confusion flickered across their faces, but only for a moment. Then came the realization, the frantic flipping through pages, the widening of eyes. The CEO who had mocked the delivery man just minutes ago turned pale. "But this is a mistake," one of them sputtered. The woman didn't answer. She only watched as security arrived, as the men who had once ruled this office were forced to gather their things. Their power, their arrogance, stripped away in an instant. As they were escorted out, the delivery man remained near the entrance, watching silently. One of the CEOs, now no more important than anyone else, met his gaze. This time, the smirk was gone. The delivery man gave a small nod before turning away, stepping into the city streets, where real work was done, not in glass towers, but in the hands of those they once looked down upon. And the world kept moving forward with or without them. Outside the building, the golden hue of the setting sun bathed the bustling city streets. The delivery man took slow, deliberate steps, not away from the company, but toward the black luxury car parked by the curb. His reflection glimmered in the polished surface as the driver stepped out and respectfully opened the door. Behind him, the fired CEOs were still reeling from the shock, their once confident expressions now stripped of arrogance. One of them squinted, as if seeing the delivery man for the first time. "Wait, what is he doing?" Another muttered, a creeping suspicion in his voice. The answer came when the woman who had just dismissed them turned toward him, offering a nod, not of superiority, but of respect. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm but firm. Realization struck like lightning. One of the CEOs paled, his breath hitching. "No, can't be. You?" But it was. The man they had just mocked, dismissed as insignificant, was no mere delivery worker. He was the new owner of the company. A slow, knowing smile tugged at the corners of his lips. You should be careful how you treat people, he said, his words deliberate. You never know who might be watching. Silence. No more laughter, no more whispered jokes at his expense. Just stunned disbelief. With that, he stepped into the car. As the doors shut, he cast one final glance out the window, watching them stand there, lost, powerless in the very world they thought they controlled. The engine hummed softly as the car pulled away, carrying him forward. Unlike them, he was not stuck in the past. He was moving ahead where he truly belonged. As the luxury car glided through the city streets, the man leaned back against the plush leather seat, watching the skyline shift past the tinted windows. The weight of years of hard work, struggle, and silent endurance settled in his chest, not as a burden, but as a quiet, satisfying victory. His phone buzzed. A message flashed on the screen. They're out. The transition is complete. Welcome to your company, Mr. Carter. A smirk played on his lips. His company. For years, he had built his empire in the shadows, acquiring businesses through silent partnerships and strategic investments. He had grown up understanding what it meant to be underestimated, to be dismissed based on appearance. He let people assume, let them believe he was just another worker, just another face in the crowd. That illusion had just shattered. Meanwhile, the former CEOs stood outside, stunned into silence. The weight of reality settled over them like a crushing force. Just hours ago, they had been at the top of the world, untouchable in their arrogance. Now they were nobodies, stripped of their power, their influence, and their pride. One of them, Tom, ran a trembling hand through his graying hair. "This isn't over," he muttered. "There has to be something we can do." The others looked at him, but no one had an answer. Their golden parachutes had been revoked, their stocks frozen under the new leadership. They weren't just fired, they had been erased. A sudden thought made Tom's stomach twist. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number, one he had rarely used before but now clung to like a lifeline. "Hello, Mr. Carter's office," a smooth voice answered. Tom swallowed hard. I need to speak to him." A pause. Then the voice responded, cool, polite, but with an edge of amusement. "I'm afraid Mr. Carter is unavailable. He's quite busy, running his company." The line went dead. That evening, Carter stepped into his new office, the very one those men had occupied for years, the same room where their laughter had once echoed. Now the silence was his. He ran a hand over the polished mahogany desk, taking in the view from the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched before him, vast and endless. A knock on the door. His assistant entered, placing a document in front of him. "Final signatures for the transition," she said. Carter picked up the pen, signing his name with steady precision. As the ink dried, he exhaled slowly, letting the moment sink in. Then, with the same calm he had carried through it all, he turned to his assistant and smiled. "Let's get to work." The night had settled over the city, but Carter wasn't done yet. He sat in his new office, reviewing files, tracing the history of the company, his company now. Each document told a story of corruption, exploitation, and greed. These men hadn't just mocked him. They had run this company into the ground, hiding behind arrogance while ignoring the damage they caused. And he wasn't here just to replace them. He was here to erase their legacy. His phone buzzed. Private number. He smirked. Right on time. Carter picked up. "Tom," he greeted smoothly, leaning back in his chair. A heavy silence hung on the other end. Then, a low voice. "You set this up, didn't you?" Carter chuckled. "You really think I spent all these years running around delivering packages for fun?" Tom inhaled sharply. "We can make a deal," he said quickly. "You got what you wanted. Fine. But I know people. Powerful people. You don't want to make enemies you can't handle. Carter's fingers tapped lightly on the desk. Funny, he mused. I remember standing in that office just hours ago while you laughed at me like I was nothing, like I was beneath you. Tom was silent. You see, Tom, Carter continued, his voice calm but laced with finality. I was watching. I watched every smirk, every condescending remark, every crooked deal you made behind closed doors. And now, he exhaled slowly, now I own it all. You have nothing left to bargain with. A tense pause. Then, Tom's voice turned desperate. Please, there has to be a way back in. Position anything. We can work together. Carter chuckled, shaking his head. I don't think so. And with that, he hung up. The next morning, Carter arrived at the office, greeted by a team that was still adjusting to the change. Some were nervous, some were hopeful. The old ways were crumbling, and in their place, something new was rising. As he stepped into the executive boardroom, his senior team stood waiting. These were the people who had been overlooked, pushed aside by the previous leadership. Now they would have a voice. Carter took his seat at the head of the table. Let's talk about the future, he said. No mocking laughter, no arrogance. Just business. And this time he was the one in control. Carter sat at the head of the table, his fingers interlocked as he studied the faces before him. The people in this room weren't the usual elite executives. He had made sure of that. No more men who inherited their positions. No more old money keeping the doors locked to outsiders. These were workers, strivers, people who had been ignored and underestimated just like him. He looked around and saw something new, diversity not just in race but in experience. People who had worked their way up, who understood what it meant to struggle. This was how real change happened. He cleared his throat. Before we begin, let me ask you all something, he said. How many of you have ever felt out of place in a room like this? Hands went up slowly at first, then almost all at once. Carter nodded. That's exactly why we're here. Because for too long power has stayed in the hands of people who only hire, promote, and support those who look like them. And if you don't fit their mold, they laugh at you. They assume you'll never make it. He leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. That ends today. We're not just running a company. We're changing the rules. But change doesn't come easy. As news spread that Carter had taken over, the old guard fought back. Articles surfaced, questioning his qualifications. Anonymous sources whispered about inexperience, ignoring the years he had spent behind the scenes, making strategic investments and building his empire. Former executives, now jobless, went on TV, framing their downfall as unfair, as if they hadn't spent decades shutting people like him out. One headline read, "From delivery man to CEO, is this company in trouble?" Carter read it with a smirk. They were afraid. He had expected this. Racism wasn't always loud. It was in the doubts, the double standards, the way they assumed he didn't belong. So he did what they never expected. He didn't just defend himself. He exposed them. Carter released years' worth of hidden reports, proof of how the former leadership had ignored workplace discrimination, denied opportunities to employees of color, and funneled contracts to their friends while shutting out minority-owned businesses. He held a press conference, standing before cameras with a quiet confidence. "This isn't about me," he told them. "It's about every qualified person who was ever told they weren't good enough, not because of their talent, but because of who they are. It's about every worker who gave their best, only to be mocked behind closed doors. The people who ran this company before me, they laughed at folks like us." He paused, scanning the crowd. "They're not laughing anymore." A legacy begins. The backlash faded. The truth was too loud to ignore. Investors saw the numbers, Carter's leadership wasn't just symbolic, it was smart. The company thrived under his direction. Profits soared, but more importantly, doors opened. For the first time, promotions weren't based on who you knew. People of color, women, immigrants, those who had been overlooked for years, finally had a seat at the table. One day, Carter walked through the office and saw something he had never seen in the old regime. A black intern leading a presentation. A woman in a hijab heading a team. A former warehouse worker in a management role. And in that moment, he knew he hadn't just taken their company. He had built something better. Months passed. The company, once an exclusive playground for the privileged, had transformed. The culture of mockery and exclusion was gone, replaced by something stronger: opportunity. Carter watched from his office window as employees bustled below. No longer just faces in the crowd, but people who knew they belonged. He had built something greater than a business. He had built a future. One afternoon, as he left the office, he noticed a young man in a delivery uniform standing at the front desk, shifting nervously as he waited. Carter smiled, recognizing the look, the same uncertainty he had once carried. He walked over. "First time here?" he asked. The delivery man nodded. "Yeah, just dropping this off." Carter took the package and handed him a business card. "Next time, come back for an interview. If you want more than deliveries, we've got room for people willing to work for it." The young man's eyes widened. "Really?" Carter chuckled. "Yeah, I started just like you, remember?" The delivery worker left with a spark of hope. And as Carter stepped into his car, he knew the cycle had been broken. Racism, arrogance, and exclusion had ruled for too long. But the best revenge isn't anger, it's success. They laughed at him once. Now he was the one opening doors. And that was a legacy no one could erase.